Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, welcome back to our show of Islam in the West after 9/11. Before the break, we had very interesting discussions with our panelists and Imam Qasim Saab. I'd like to introduce two new guests that I have in the studio with me now. To begin with, Barrister Mahmood Khan. He is the chairman of Pakistan Khidmat-E-Khalq League, a political party registered in Pakistan, as well as a barrister and the principal of a London-based law firm and internationally based Nationwide Law Associates. Barrister Saab, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, giving me this opportunity.
No, the pleasure is all ours. And secondly, I'd like to introduce our guest on the screen. They've joined us all the way from America, Mr. Akbar Salahuddin Ahmed. They are a Pakistani American academic, author, poet, playwright, filmmaker, and former diplomat. They also served as the Pakistani High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland, and presently they are a professor of international relations at the American University, the School of International Service in Washington, where they also hold the title of Ibn Khaldun, which is the Chair of Islamic Studies. Akbar Saab, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining us today, Akbar Saab. I think there's been a slight signal, but we'll proceed with our guest who's in the studio with us, and we'll wait for Akbar Saab to reconnect. Barrister Saab, the first question that I wanted to ask today is the day itself, September 11, 9/11.
Yeah.
Now, there are many people watching and many people in the West who are not familiar with the events of the day and the aftermath, the immediate aftermath and the reactions, how life was before and how life was after. Perhaps they're too young. Bearing in mind this event occurred 24 years ago. So anyone in their early 20s or teenage years, they won't be well acquainted with this incident, except for what they've read in the history books. So the first question that I'd like to address today is, what was your lived experience of that day? What do you remember?
I clearly remember the day because I was in my office and it was a lunch break. I went home for lunch. On the way back to the office, my radio, the car radio was on, and when the first plane hit the Twin Towers, it actually gave that news. And it's all fresh in my mind as if this happened, yesterday. And it was a strange feeling because it was unbelievable what they were actually saying on the news, that Twin Towers were hit. And then I think while I was driving, I didn't reach the office. By the time I reached the office, I think the second plane also crashed into it. And then obviously we went into the office, switched on the TV, and saw the whole incident clearly screened on the news. And what really was crossing my mind at the time, that obviously this incident happened out of blue. So how comes that there were so many cameras actually catching the footage of the airplanes going into these Twin Towers? That was something, if you already knew beforehand something's happening, so you get your cameras ready. And remember, today, day and age, with the mobile system that we got, it wasn't like that in 9/11, in 2001 we're talking about. So having cameras in a position where they can actually catch the planes going into the Twin Towers was the thing that I still remember that, questioning myself, that how is it possible that they actually captured those footage so clear. And clearly, as a Muslim, because slowly the reports start coming, who were behind it, what was the reason behind it, and clearly as a Muslim living in the UK, we started to worry because the whole blame is coming on the Muslims. And the other thing which I really wasn't, even this day, I don't understand. whoever was the master plan behind it, whoever was carrying out this, and if for the Muslims, I don't understand what they gained from it. What would they gain from doing such a act of terrorism? They were the one who were going to lose if anything like that happened. So that always lingers in my mind. Who actually benefited from this terrorist act? And if we look at it, and analyze it from retrospectively looking at it today, the way the world is actually moved on from 9/11, it appears that there was some kind of planning in advance how the world order is going to be in coming futures, in a coming time.
Indeed, these are very, very insightful questions, and this was the experience for yourself in London. And Akbar Saab, thank you for joining us all the way from America. Were you in the States at the time of the incident?
Faizan Saab, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. So I was in class. I had just joined American University in Washington, D.C., and I was teaching my first or second class when the planes hit New York. And don't forget, there was one plane that flew into the Pentagon. The Pentagon is a structure which is very central, very symbolic of America and its military might, just 4 or 5 miles from my university. So this was something very, very close. And I saw the impact on my students who began to scatter, and people didn't know what was happening. Was this an attack? Were there more planes coming in? There were all kinds of rumors. And what worried me straight away, because I had already spent the 1990s in England, and I had made many major projects, including Living Islam for the BBC. It's a 6-part series in which I tried very, very much to counter the assault and the allegations against Islam, that Islam is a religion which promotes misogyny, it doesn't promote education, it's violent, it's a worthless civilization. So I was already involved in that debate. And I knew now in America on 9/11 that this is the debate that is going to emerge in America. And I knew there would be a huge chasm between Muslims and non-Muslims. And I decided then and there, I was at the university as a professor, more or less retired, and looking forward to a very relaxed kind of tenure as a professor. But I realized that unless every Muslim played the role of an ambassador and a bridge builder, Muslims will be very isolated and they will be blamed, and that blame will not go away, it will just magnify. So I threw myself straight after that, into a very, very hectic round of meetings, seminars, White House, Pentagon, State Department, think tanks, universities, and also the media. So I was in mosques, in synagogues, in churches, promoting dialogue so that people would have some idea about Islam, because Americans were asking, including, if you recall, the President of America, President Bush, who asked, and this was then picked up by the media, why do they hate us? And of course, the answer came from the media, because at that time, and again coming from before 9/11, was the thesis popularized by Samuel Huntington, a professor at Harvard, that there was a clash of civilizations taking place between the West and the world of Islam. And that theory, which was a theory, it was marginal, now became a popular mainstream theory. So I, as a Muslim scholar, and I hoped other Muslims would do this, had to challenge that and engage with that. And that's what I tried to do after 9/11.
MashaAllah. Akbar Saab, I have to say that excellent work that you have been doing and you are doing, and you even published a recent book, America at the Crossroads, which I've not read yet, but I'm very keen on reading when I do get my hand on it. So Akbar Saab, thank you so much for all the hard work that you have done for the Muslims and the Ummah in reshaping the narrative that's been spread against Islam ever since 2001 and even before that. Now, something that Barrister Saab mentioned, which really struck me, was what did the Muslims gain from this incident? What was the motive behind it? So I just want to take some time to discuss that a little bit, Akbar Saab. In your mind, and Barrister Saab, is there any gain that the Muslims got from this so-called attack?
It's a very interesting question, Faizan Saab, and remember, I am studying all this as a scholar, as a Muslim social scientist. So I saw two things. The gain. I found, and it's in my book, Journey into America, and in the film, I made a film on this whole discussion about Muslims in America, that a lot of Americans had begun to convert to Islam. So it was a paradox because there was so much negative rubbish and nonsense in the media. But with that, people had access to the Quran, the people had access to the life of the noble Prophet, peace be upon him. So suddenly, Americans who knew little about Islam had access to Islam, and people were converting. Secondly, a lot of women were converting. I found that fascinating because American women are, I think, the most free in the whole world. And yet they were prepared to give up that freedom and to accept Islam and live in the Islamic way. That was the big plus. The minus, Faizan, I'm afraid there's a very big minus. We must not overlook that. Maybe you and I didn't face that, but ordinary Muslims right across the Muslim world, whether in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, they faced a terrible blowback. So there were hundreds of thousands of Muslims who were killed, disrupted, destroyed, their families broken. And that cycle of violence which we entered, I'm afraid, and I have to say this with great sorrow, that cycle is still in revolution. It hasn't come out. And here's where the Muslim world has to and needed to respond in a much more vigorous way, a way with which they reflect the vision, the wisdom, the compassion of the Islamic vision of the world. And that hasn't fully come through. So we are still seeing things of a crisis in the Far East, or in the Middle East, or in Yemen. And that is that big picture question that I'm raising in the new study that I'm doing.
That's brilliant. That is very interesting. Barrister Saab, would you like to add?
Well, clearly what I want to add is that every action has a reaction. Now this incident, in a way, as my colleague mentioned, is that he actually introduced the West to Islam. I don't think so that was the planning behind it. If whoever carried out that act were Muslims, I don't think so they were actually thinking in those terms. But what he actually did, he helped Islam to be introduced to the West. And having, you see, this planning itself, because to my mind, a plan of such kind actually fires back. So whatever the purpose or the actually hidden purpose was, it actually introduced Islam to the West. And in some extent, it helped Islam to expand. And a lot of people converted to Islam or reverted to Islam. And obviously, what comes to my mind in these kind of situations is that human plans. God says in the Quran, there's one planning by the humans and there's God's planning. So clearly, it was human planning, but God's planning is different. And maybe that was the way God planned for Islam to be introduced in the West. And whatever the evil forces were trying to do, in fact, or clearly, God will is planning something different. So I think that in a way helped, and it's a process that actually started in 9/11, and it continues. And I think with today's political situation in Gaza, it actually, again, it's a genocide. But that genocide is actually introducing the humanity to Islam. And the West and non-Muslims are learning more about Islam. The more they learn about Islam, more of them are actually coming into Islam. So even though there's evil is happening, people are being murdered, killed, but at the same time, it's actually helping the non-Muslim to learn more about Islam and understand better Islam. My overall thought is that it was a beginning, 9/11 was a beginning of a new world order. Obviously, whoever planned it 50 years ahead or 100 years ahead. And that is, if you look at it now, the present situation, how the 9/11 actually affected, or the rules and regulations which were brought in, especially the laws, to control terrorism, is gone to a stage where I was listening to Mozambique that now in UK, you cannot have a peaceful demonstration. They will arrest you. They have arrested so many people for actually standing with the people of Palestine, because there's clearly a genocide committed. But people of this country, when they come out against that, now it's actually classified as you're supporting the terrorism. In fact, they are supporting the humanity. But this is part and parcel of what was started back in 9/11, because they started to basically scrutinize everything. And the security and the protection, airports and everywhere, it actually increased. So that actually started then, but now it's gone to a stage where you cannot stand up for your rights or others' rights. You cannot say nothing. If you say anything for the human rights, you're being classified as a terrorist or troublemaker, and for that they can arrest you. This my assumption with the way things are going and what will happen in future is that we are in the Dajjal system now. Dajjal has totally controlled the world politics. But this is a fight between the humanity and the Dajjal. It's not a fight just purely between the Muslims and the Dajjal. Actually, this is a fight between the humanity, people who will stand up for humanity, and the Dajjal. The powerful people in the world, they all think alike. You look at every Muslim country, you look at the Western countries, they all think the same way. If America says something, the rest of them, regardless they're Muslim or not, they will follow them. So this actually slowly is heading towards the end of times. It will be a clash between civilization and humanity with the evil forces.
Definitely, and some very interesting assessments there, Barrister Saab. And one thing in particular you mentioned was that the right for peaceful protesting is slowly being taken away. Many rights have been slowly taken away over the course of the last 24 years, and these seem to have stemmed from the events of September 11, 2001. So, Akbar Saab, Barrister Saab, what I want to ask is, do you feel that these policies or laws that come into force, do they indirectly or directly impact Muslims more than they tend to do anyone else? Do they tend to silence Muslims more than anyone else?
Certainly do, Faizan, because they are in a sense, they are the direct target, whichever way you shape it, whichever way you package it. Now, sitting in Washington, the nation's capital, I was acutely aware of these arguments. People were writing books, they were making comments in the media. I was invited to contribute whatever I could from my point of view. And I was alarmed because, again, there was very little thinking coming from the Muslim world. There was a lot of emotion, a lot of ideas, a lot of theories, but little solid academic presentations, which is what impresses the West. Western societies, Muslims very easily condemn them and dismiss them, but Western societies pride themselves on being very fair and neutral and basing their arguments on research and on evidence. So I said, all right, I'm hearing so much nonsense about Islam in the media. Islam is this, Islam is that, and people in the media, there'd be 4 experts, all 4 of them talking negatively about Islam, and none of them really knowing much about Islam. So I decided to launch a series of high-level projects based in fieldwork. And I took with me 3 or 4 of my students from campus. And this was a remarkable project and a remarkably ambitious idea that I would travel throughout the Muslim world and come back and write it up after questionnaires, interviews, and an idea of what the Muslim world is really thinking, what they're really like. Does that image match with what the West is saying, or is it very different? And what are the solutions for moving forward? Because Faizan sir, for me, and I want to emphasize this, for me, it is critical that the Islamic vision of harmony, of compassion, of peace prevail, and cannot prevail in this mood where we are constantly going through this cycle of acquisition and counter acquisition. So I launched 4 projects. The first project was called Journey into Islam. So we went through the Muslim world, the Middle East, South Asia, up to Indonesia. And remember, these are long projects, traveling for months and months, and very tough. The second one was Journey into America. I traveled to 75 cities and towns in America, 75 over 1 year. And I went to 100 mosques. African American mosques, Arab mosques, South Asian mosques. So again, we had collected a lot of data and we got a very good idea of the community. Then I took a project which took me to Europe, and it was called Journey into Europe. And there I discovered that they constantly, the propaganda was Islam has no role to play in Europe. Islam had a very big role to play in Europe. And I would have wanted every Muslim to know about Andalusia and the contribution that Islam made for 1,000 years in Andalusia. Like very few Europeans know about this. And then the Ottomans and their contribution in the Balkans. And I met these wonderful communities in the Balkans who were Muslim, among the Bosnians, for example, and very good Muslim, decent Muslims, very proud of being Muslims. They said, we are Europeans, but we're also Muslim. And then, of course, my 4th project, which you'll be interested in, Faizan Saab, as an intellectual, was called The Thistle and the Drone. The thistle meaning that little prickly flower. And as you know, it's a flower that Scotland has adopted as its symbol. It's a prickly flower, meaning that if you pull it out, it may prick you in your finger. And it comes from Tolstoy's famous book. He wrote a very famous small book, a novella really, called Haji Murat. Murat was this Chechen warrior. And while he was there with the Imperial Russian army, Tolstoy said, I plucked a thistle and it pricked me. And he said, the tribes are like the thistle. And that's why I picked the notion of thistle and the drone. And I took 40 tribal societies, Muslim, right across from Morocco, North Africa, Middle East, into Central Asia and South Asia. So South Asia, from Pakistan, you have Baloch, Pathan, Afghans. So these were the thistle. And then the drone was modern technology. The drone was being used to bomb them, kill them. Waziristan was where I served as a political agent in charge of Waziristan, was the most bombed place on earth. Non-stop they were being bombed. Now, when you end up by bombing people, you're going to disrupt them, you're going to kill them. And for every 5 people you kill, you'll have 50 people who'll join people who are going to fight the establishment or the West or NATO or whoever. So again, the notion that you have a world situation where my job as scholar was to take a snapshot, and then my job as a peace activist was to try to promote ways to improve relations between Muslims and non-Muslims. And I found, and I'd conclude with this, Faizan Saab, that a lot of non-Muslims would constantly tell me, we know nothing about what is your history. What do you say about women? Do you treat women badly? What do you say about non-Muslims? Do you want to kill us all? Does your Quran say that all non-Muslims should be killed? What about the notion of jihad? So a lot of my time went in explaining this, explaining the basic fundamentals of Islam. And I think that is the greatest service a Muslim can do in this environment today. Anger, emotion will take you only that far and not get you much further. We are discussing what's happening in England or in America. There's a lot of tension. Do not fool yourself. There's a lot of tension and Muslims are in the crosshairs. Crosshairs means you're like that. There's a gun pointing at you. Now, how do you get out of that? You get out by having dialogue, make friends, build bridges. That is the most essential thing. And again, I go back. Go to the Muslim world today in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and look at the condition of those people. You mentioned Gaza. I can't see the news anymore. I'm a father, I'm a grandfather. This affects me. And therefore, I feel guilty that I'm sitting here, I'm eating properly, I'm drinking water. There are children who don't have water to drink. Children who are being shot in the head just for being born Muslim. That is a situation that's unacceptable to me. So all I can do as a scholar is my research. I want to use my knowledge as a tool, and I have as I told you, done a lot of research recently, particularly on the golden age of Islam, to show the world that there was a time when Muslims are contributing research, science, astronomy, literature, medicine, in all these arts and these sciences, Muslims were at the cutting edge. And that is a time that should inspire us. But if, and I say this with regret, Muslims are not aware of it, we are just chasing money and we want buildings and we want big cars and big houses, we are going to suffer. When we constantly compare ourselves to this community or that community, as a scholar, I always point out that that community is doing well because they're investing in education for their children. Their children are becoming doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs. What are your children doing? Anger and yelling around is fine, but that's not going to take you anywhere. Invest in education, invest in the future. And that, again, I want to end by repeating what Qaid-e-Azam, what Allama Iqbal, what Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan, the great giants from South Asia,